And the reason for this is there are no guidelines for nutritional trials. None. The same way there are for inventions like devices or drugs and pharmaceutical companies, there's guidelines for trials. Doesn't exist in the nutrition space, okay? So there's a quote from a woman named Kelly Pritchett, who's a nutrition and exercise scientist at Central Washington University. She says, quote, "Nutrition research is a difficult task given all the extraneous variables that need to be controlled. Therefore, it's important to take into account or control for as many of these variables as possible, i.e., anything that affects our diet, sleep, living situation, time of year, activity levels, medical history." Think about this, guys. There's so much to control, it's nearly impossible. How would you do that? It would have to be like the movie Biodome with Pauly Shore. That's the only way you do it. You either need to perfectly replicate the environment and put them in a dome and control everything, or you have to do what's called a metabolic ward study, okay? That's the only way you can do any kind of gold standard clinical studies with nutrition. So what happens in these studies is the diet studies are conducted in a sterile lab where everything from caloric intake to exercise to sleep of each participant is under complete control of the scientist conducting the experiment. But obviously, that's not very simple. It's damn near impossible, right? Because even when we get these, they're highly disappointing. Why? Because they cost tens of millions of dollars to do. It's absolutely insane. Nusi tried to do a bunch of these, right? So first of all, you need to put people in the metabolic ward. Pay for everything, pay for the scientists, pay for everything, right? Now, what happens is every now and then we get metabolic ward studies. And then they're cited over and over and over and over. But because they're so expensive, we'll talk about the length of that. So people will say things like, well, they put subjects in a metabolic ward for 2 whole weeks, 14 whole days. Half the patients ate a caloric surplus that was high carb, and half the subjects ate a caloric surplus that was high fat, and both gained the same amount of body fat. See, calories in, calories out. Calories are all that matters, right? 14 days in, and I know nothing about the metabolic health of any of those subjects. This is crazy, okay? Now, what if we perform that same study for 6 months? Well, considering these few-week metabolic studies can run $10 to $13 million, first of all, we would go broke trying to do this, right? But my personal opinion is if we kept those studies up with those same dietary values for 6 months, the results would probably be very, very different. Again, my opinion, not an expert, not a doctor, okay? In fact, nutrition changes in populations can have impacts for generations. Weston A. Price has documented this with his work. I've talked to you guys about it before, called transgenerational changes. A mom with a poor diet can have an insulin-resistant baby, right? Things like that. We know these to be true. So what happens is the metabolic wards, too difficult, too expensive, all this stuff, not to mention finding volunteers that would live in isolation for a study like that for years, because a lot, like that one we talked about today was from 1985 to 2016. You can't put somebody in a metabolic ward for 30 years or whatever. It's not gonna happen, you know what I mean? So instead, what we get is food questionnaires, like this egg study. Little pieces of paper that ask the subjects what they ate for that week or that month, and they're expected to recall from memory. Oh, and they're also expected to be honest. Wait a second. You're asking people about something as private as nutrition. How many women have lied to you about what they ate? How many men have lied to you about what they ate? Happens all the time, right? So how far off is the data? Well, a paper published in 2013 that I found on PubMed, that is called, let me get the name of this. Validity of U.S. Nutritional Surveillance, National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, Caloric Energy Intake Data. Okay, in case you wanted to know the name of that. So what they found was they looked at almost 4 decades of results from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. They called it NHANES, okay? This is the big U.S. government database on diet. And they compared what people said they ate and how much they'd need to eat to simply stay alive, okay? Their findings, quote, across the 39-year history of the NHANES, the energy intake data, how many calories were consumed, on the majority of respondents, 67.3% of women and 58.7% of men, were not physiologically plausible. Let me be clear on that. 39 years of history of food questionnaire studies. the responses from 67% of women and 58% of men were physiologically not plausible. That is, if people ate what they said they ate, they would have died. Whoa, okay? In other words, more than half the data after 39 years is demonstrably wrong. And that's not even counting people who were overeating. What are we doing here? What are we doing here with these food questionnaires? It's absolutely insane. And then we're telling people how to be healthy on this. So let's talk about why I'm so upset about this. Because the other day, something occurred to me. So again, I always have extensive show notes. I'm going to share this in the show notes for you guys. But Rob Wolf did a little YouTube video from his kitchen talking about autophagy and how autophagy kind of pisses him off. So, and I gotta say, I'm with him there a little bit. I don't want to get negative here, right? But once I started talking about fasting, right? The second I put out a fasting episode, I got hit with so much correspondence, email, messages, social media, everything, just fasting, Everybody wants to fast, right? But remember, you guys are already Clovis. Everybody forgets that when I did the fasting episode, I'm like, you can get 70% of these benefits just by being Clovis and eating normal food, right? So autophagy being the cleaning up of cells, replacing malfunctioning parts in the cells. I'm not gonna get into that today. But, so Rob releases this video on autophagy and why it annoys him a bit that everyone is so obsessed with it via prolonged fasting. So, as he details, and he's correct about this, it's the same thing with intermittent fasting, the types of people interested in cellular autophagy and apoptosis, generally speaking, are like me. The people who don't really need it. See what I'm saying? Nerds who are already super healthy, probably have very low risk of any chronic disease. So the reason why I say this is because, as Rob pointed out, in a perfect world, the human body is healthy by default. Our normal state is healthy, but in America, that is not true. In anywhere who's adopted a westernized diet, it's not true. Normal is sick. Normal is not healthy, okay? So this is the tricky part. People are only obsessed with things like autophagy because we're already sick. We wouldn't need it if we weren't. So for example, cancer prevention is often cited as a reason for autophagy and apoptosis. You want to kill those precancerous cells. Well, cancer doesn't make us sick. We get cancer because we're chronically sick. You see? There's chronic illness happening, there's metabolic dysfunction happening that leads to this crazy growth of cells, right? We shouldn't be that way. Cancer is a modern problem. There were no hunter-gatherers dropping dead of cancer 11,000 years ago. They didn't need extra autophagy to prevent such things. They didn't have an app on their phone going, start fast and end fast out in the jungle because they wanted autophagy and apoptosis to prevent cancer that everyone was dying of. This is a modern thing, okay? If us humans hadn't messed things up so badly over the last 10,000 years with agriculture, then we wouldn't need diets and protocols to begin with. We wouldn't even be discussing autophagy, okay? So this got my wheels spinning, and they were spinning hard. So I started poking around the history of nutrition studies. Let me show you some stuff.